It's kind of funny now looking back over 10 years later how much my perspective has changed about WrestleMania 20. Just to give you a quick little story. WrestleMania 20 was a show that I ordered, and I had some friends come over and watch, and there were three primary reasons that I ordered this pay-per-view. There were three major selling points for this show. That was Eddie Guerrero defending his title, number one. Number two was Undertaker returning as what I knew was going to be the dead man. And then number three, my man finally getting his chance, his moment in the sun, and hopefully getting the opportunity to become the next world heavyweight champion. Like I said, it's amazing how much more differently I view this show now in 2014 as opposed to 2004. I never viewed WrestleMania 20 as one of the all time great WrestleManias. No, let's not get that twisted. I never ever did. But it was a show that ultimately I liked, and it delivered for what I originally was expecting. It delivered based off of what I actually bought the show for. But like I said, now in 2014, I have an entirely different perspective about the show. And it's one of those things that it goes from triumph to tragedy, really. And it truly is sad. And I think this WrestleMania, more than any other in WWE history, perfectly embodies and personifies triumph to tragedy. It really, really does. Now, as far as this show, it took place at Madison Square Garden. And I always liked that tradition. You had WrestleMania 1 at the Garden, 10 at the Garden, 20 at the Garden. I was really hoping WrestleMania 30 would be at the Garden. But I understand now, in the reality of today's WWE, they feel like we just can't have a WrestleMania in a 20,000 seat venue when we can sell out 60, 70, 80,000 seats every year for this big time event. Putting it into Madison Square Garden might have some sentimental meaning to certain fans, but in general, it doesn't create that Super Bowl type of atmosphere that the WWE wants to create with a WrestleMania. And I get that, and I understand it. Doesn't mean I have to like it. But if I was a part of the decision making process, I have a feeling ultimately I would gravitate towards that way of thinking. But when I look at this show, like I said, I'm very torn in a lot of ways. There were some good things on this show. There were some bad things on this show. One of the things I didn't like about this show was the fact that you had seven different titles defended throughout the night. It was too many. You had two mid card belts, you had the women's title, you had two tag team belts, two world titles being defended. It just, I think, out of the 12 matches on the card, more than half of them were title matches, and in some ways, it was too much. There were too many title matches, too many matches that were supposed to have major significance. It just kind of didn't work for me. But this was a show in and of itself that did have some very good matches, and ironically, the opener was actually a really good match. How ironic is it that you look back 10 years later now, in 2014, and you look at WrestleMania 20 in Madison Square Garden, and John Cena was getting loudly and roundly cheered, and most fans were wanting this moment to happen. They were wanting him to beat the Big Show, and they were wanting him to become the United States champion. How funny is that? How ironic is that now as we look ahead to WrestleMania 30, where everybody's wondering whether John Cena is actually going to do the job for a Bray Wyatt, and people are tired of him and sick of him and everything else. Back in 2004, it was a different story. And, this was a good opener, a good match. I've always felt Cena and Big Show had good chemistry together in the ring. The finish was really good. It was that first real signature WrestleMania moment for a John Cena where he puts the Big Show up on his shoulders and delivers the old FU, and bam, he's the United States champion. Oh, great, great opener to this card. One of these things where you're talking about where it all begins again, and you're emphasizing things from the past, but you're also focusing on the now and, more importantly, the future. And John Cena was obviously somebody that was going to fit into that future. Both tag team matches on this card are really nothing special to talk about, so I won't really devote a lot of time to it. The Cruiserweight Championship match, I'll say this, is that it was okay, but I always felt the wrong guy won. That's just my opinion on it. One really good match on this card that always, I think, gets underrated and it gets left out when people talk about really good to great WrestleMania matches was Christian versus Jericho one-on-one. Obviously, this all revolved around Trish Stratus and everything. But goddamn, this match was really freaking good. Really good. And you could have argued at this point in time that Chris Jericho didn't have to put a Christian over, but he did. And it elevated Christian's profile a little bit, I feel, as a singles competitor. This was a really damn good match. I forgot that this match was even on the card. And then when I went back and watched it again, I'm like, man, this was a really good match. And it told a good story. And goddamn, Trish was hot back at this time. You had the handicap tag match, 3-on-2 Evolution. That's Orton, Batista, and Flair taking on the Rock and Sock Connection. And this kind of all tied into that great rivalry that I feel that Mick Foley and Randy Orton had in 2004. And this was really something that was designed to put Randy Orton on the map, the way they were packaging it, the way they were presenting it. This was designed to let you know that Randy Orton was the future and he was going to be the guy. And whereas you had a John Cena winning the U.S. title at the beginning of the show, now you've got Randy Orton involved in a match alongside a Ric Flair going against The Rock and Mick Foley. Of course, Foley was going to do the job here. An okay match, I guess. Nothing more, nothing less. But again, when you go back and look at it, it was kind of one of those things where you were celebrating some of the past history of WrestleMania and focusing on the present and, more importantly, the future, and particularly with Orton and Batista, two guys that would go on to become big stars for the WWE. You had the, the Playboy match with Tori and Sable taking on Stacy Keibler and Miss Jackie. Whatever. Victoria, Molly Holly, hair versus belt match for the women's championship. This is funny, especially since Molly Holly had to shave her head. That's always funny when I go back and think about it. One thing that is not funny on this show, and to me reeks of the highest level of disappointment I've maybe ever had with any particular match at any particular show in WWF/WWE history. Easily the worst, in my opinion, and it's not even close. You could take that Undertaker Giant Gonzalez and shove it up your ass. To me, beyond question, the worst WrestleMania match of all time, by itself, bar none, period, was Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar with Stone Cold Steve Austin as the special guest referee. Here's a guy in the late 90s, early 2000s, was a freaking monster in Goldberg. And now here comes a Goldberg type of presence from the WWE standpoint, and Brock Lesnar. And you started teasing this at the Rumble, and you were building up to this, and this felt like this was going to be one of these special attraction monster versus monster type of matches that we really wanted to see at a WrestleMania. This was something that had so many things going for it on paper. And then you got the toughest son of a bitch on the planet, Stone Cold Steve Austin, as the special guest referee because he's the only one that can keep order between these two. It looked like that this was going to go down as one of those great, memorable WrestleMania matches. And then something happened. You find out Goldberg's contract is up and WrestleMania 20 is going to be his last match. Then you start to get the word the week of WrestleMania 20 that Brock Lesnar apparently doesn't want to be there anymore. This is going to be his last match because he wants to go try and play professional football. Oh my God. So by the time you get there with a smart kind of crowd at Madison Square Garden, WrestleMania 20, here's Goldberg and Brock Lesnar, and the WWE would nowadays call this Bizarro World and everything else, but this was a train wreck. And this was a complete and total disaster. You could clearly see to me that Goldberg and Brock Lesnar, neither one of them cared. Neither one of them wanted to be there. Austin's like, what the fuck am I supposed to do here? They're standing around. They're looking at each other. It's some of the most awkward, garbage-ass bullshit I have ever seen. This is one of those things that I was really looking forward to back in 2004 on this WrestleMania 20 card. And 10 years later, it only grows in its shittiness as the years go by. And it ultimately was an embarrassment, I think, for Vince McMahon and the WWE. An embarrassment from Goldberg's standpoint and Brock Lesnar's standpoint. They helped contribute to that embarrassment. An embarrassment for a Stone Cold Steve Austin because he even had to be involved in this shit. You had these two monsters that were supposed to go out there and have this incredible storytelling type of match. Monster versus monster. Irresistible force, immovable object. Immovable object versus immovable object. And it ends up all being about Goldberg winning just so both of them could get stunned by Stone Cold Steve Austin. The biggest abortion of a WrestleMania match I have ever seen, and I guarantee ever will see. And yes, like I said, you could take Undertaker Giant Gonzalez and shove it up your ass. You can take Brett versus Vince at WrestleMania 26, and you can pound that up your ass too. Beyond question to me, the worst WrestleMania match in history, bar none, period, is this abomination, this abortion that was allowed to be a featured attraction on this card between Goldberg and Brock Lesnar. This was terrible. So now we get to the three matches that ultimately drew me to actually pay for this pay-per-view and watch it in 2004. Eddie Guerrero versus Kurt Angle for the WWE Championship. And I had a fear going into it that Eddie wasn't going to hold the strap here. I always felt that, you know, especially as you got closer to WrestleMania and you find out Lesnar's looking to leave and that word gets out, I'm like, oh my God, they just put it on Guerrero to give us that moment at No Way Out so that way he could drop the strap back to Angle at WrestleMania. I was really concerned. I thought that's where they were going to go. Thank God they didn't, because it creates one of those timeless WrestleMania memories and moments for me to see Eddie Guerrero walk in the WWE Champion and walk out the WWE Champion in a fun match. And the finish was well done. A good match between these two. It's definitely a fond memory, but again, it's one of those feelings of triumph becomes tragedy, especially now when you look back at 2014, and Eddie's been gone for almost 9 years now. Really sad. And then, of course, another big part of this for me was the Undertaker coming back as the dead man, coming back at Kane. And when I heard Paul Bearer's voice, I said, oh, God, this is going to be fucking awesome. And there's Taker, and I'm like, this is going to be fucking awesome. And then the match happened, and it wasn't so awesome. For these two guys that had such a good match at WrestleMania 14, 6 years later here at WrestleMania 20, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened to the chemistry. I don't know what went wrong, but this match just didn't work. I almost wish that the entrance for The Undertaker was longer than the actual match, that he would have come back and gotten some quick revenge on Kane for taking part in the Buried Alive match. What was it, at Survivor Series or whatever, the previous year. I wish this would have ended quickly, because it was like, it's an epic mark-out moment for Taker to come back, a tremendous entrance, a great surprise to see Paul Bearer. He comes out, and then the match kind of stinks up the joint a little bit, and Taker wins, and people are like, oh, that was kind of all right. Yeah. A lot of stuff going into it, and a lot of elements that would made you thought that this match belonged in the spot of the card that it did. It was perfectly positioned. I will give the WWE credit for this. The last three matches on the card were perfectly positioned. Eddie and Angle, then you throw in Taker and Kane to split up the two world titles, and then the right match ultimately main event. And that is what is, to me, maybe still the greatest triple threat match, at least in the history of the WWE, and easily the greatest triple threat match in WrestleMania history. And that's Chris Benoit versus Triple H versus Shawn Michaels for the World Heavyweight Championship. I've made my feelings known about Benoit before in my video, To Hell with Chris Benoit. But this is, to me, the ultimate, the epitome of triumph becoming tragedy. Because the number one reason, ultimately, that I bought this show in 2004 was because my guy, Chris Benoit, had won the 2004 Royal Rumble. And I was hoping that they were no longer going to keep him down. And I was hoping that this was finally going to be his moment. This was finally going to be the time that my guy, Chris Benoit, was going to be the top guy in the company. That my guy, Chris Benoit, after all these years of struggle and all the places he had been all around the world, he was going to get his moment. Fuck the Triple H's and fuck the Shawn Michaels. It was going to be about Chris Benoit, and it was going to be about something different, and he was going to become the World Heavyweight Champion. And even though I was concerned heading into it, because I'm like, man, you got Triple H there, and you got Shawn Michaels there, they can't do this, can they? They've got to realize that this is the only possible decision, right? And as it found out that it was main eventing, I'm like, it's got to. This has got to happen. But that whole match, I was on pins and needles. I was sitting on the edge of my seat. It's one of the most prevalent examples of me being riveted by a non-Taker match in WrestleMania history, especially as an adult. There's no question about it. And you could maybe argue that in terms of how anxious and nervous I was awaiting the outcome and awaiting the result, that this may rank up there with me with any Undertaker match with the streak on the line at WrestleMania. There's no question. And I can't express how glorious it was for me as a huge Benoit fan at this time at WrestleMania 20 in 2004 to find out that the number one reason that I bought the show ended up happening. and Chris Benoit makes Triple H tap, and Chris Benoit is the world heavyweight champion. And then afterwards, in that epic, timeless moment of triumph for these two warriors that had traveled the road together for so many years and been through so many ups and downs, here comes Eddie Guerrero with his WWE Championship. Here comes Chris Benoit with his World Heavyweight Championship standing in the ring. And then they embrace, and the confetti falls, and they raise each other's hands. And it's one of those truly organic and real, natural moments that you very rarely get in wrestling. But when you get them, it means so much. Little did we know that now in 2014, we look back on that and we look at what happened with both Eddie and Chris, and you realize just how tragic this finish ultimately is. Because it represented so many things about what was good about professional wrestling and what can be good about professional wrestling, and those type of real human emotion moments that everybody can connect to and everybody can understand. And now it's all gone. And it's wiped out, erased from the memory banks as far as the WWE is concerned. And it's something that'll always have a dark cloud hanging over it and a bad stain on it. And it's tragic and it's sad. This is one of these shows that, even though it wasn't the greatest WrestleMania of all time, it had a lot of elements going for it. It's one of those things that the three things that I bought the show for, all three of them happened. And, I was pleased with all three of the results ultimately. But yet I look back on this show, and this is one of these shows, frankly, that when I put it in, I really want to stop watching after the Undertaker Kane match. Because it almost hurts too much to watch the main event. It's almost too painful to see what happens and then remember what happened.